Like, yeah, okay. Hey, welcome everyone to Office Hours Episode 2. I'm your host, Davis Hunt, Editor-in-Chief of the Pamphleteer. We got a good show ahead of you today. What I do, open up the show, run through the past week of coverage that we've done in our daily newsletter that we send out to subscribers. If you're not subscribed to our daily newsletter, you have to do that. We every morning we send out newsletters that cover Nashville, Middle Tennessee, more broadly Tennessee, but we mostly focus on Middle Tennessee politics and culture and kind of track developments there. Um, so again, if you're not on that list, you go to pamphleteer.co. We have a very easy sign up form. It's probably familiar to you if you've ever navigated the internet before. So we're going to look back at some of the stuff that we put in the newsletter this past week. First thing up is there's the URL right there. So if you can't figure out how to get there, I can't help you. So moving on to what has happened of interest in the last week at the Pamphleteer. First, we have a young man, a 9-year-old, out of, I think he's from Colombia, who's entering into the national mullet competition. And just starting off with something light. I mean, look at that mullet. That's a 9-year-old. I bet there's some 40-year-old audience members that couldn't grow a mullet like that. I think I could. Maybe I could. I'm not. Hard to say. So anyway, that's the 9-year-old competing for the mullet championship. Next up, we're talking about Freddie O'Connell. Everyone knows Freddie O'Connell has been leading all the polls. This is a screenshot from his ad called The Ball, which presents the question, billionaires and bachelorettes or us? And for most of us, the preeminent question with Freddie is who is us? And Freddie, who recently had an interview with Ed Clay, who's a local entrepreneur, and kind of tried to probe what exactly he meant by us, addressing some of Freddie's more vocal responses to attack ads issued against him by Steve Smith. Freddie says, we get to be strategic about not only what we invest in, who we invest in, but what kinds of people we'd like to attract to this city. So more than any other candidate, Freddie has ventured to define who he wants in the city and who he doesn't. No one else has drawn lines that way. There's been this kind of implicit anti-tourist animus among all mayoral candidates. Everyone generally opposes the Titan Stadium deal, and the racetrack deal is a little more complicated. And as you'll read if you read our newsletter this morning, you would learn that deal was deferred indefinitely, which is Bristol Motor Speedway trying to redevelop the Nashville Fairgrounds into a NASCAR track. And I think the council's just been weary from having to deal with so much work, and they decided to defer that until the next mayor. But Freddie, like I said, has ventured to try to draw a line between who is welcome in the city and who is not, more so than any other. And so who is us? Who is the us that Freddie is talking about? We can look, one way to assess that is look at who has endorsed him. He's endorsed by Planned Parenthood. He's endorsed by the Sunrise Movement, which is kind of like a little league Just Stop Oil. That even Bernie Sanders, Just Stop Oil are those people that go and throw paint on paintings in the Louvre and all that stuff. Pretty frustrating people. It's also the people that you probably see in videos where they're sitting in front of trucks in rush hour traffic, stopping traffic, and you see the guy get out and move them off the street, which is probably what I would do if I was stuck in traffic and I found out that it was people sitting in the middle of the street protesting something that they or me had no control over. I would do the same thing, even if I didn't want to go where I was going. It's just kind of a nuisance. But Bernie Sanders has divorced himself from that movement. He's also, endorsed by the two arguably the two most progressive council members, who are Sandra Sepulveda and Sean Parker. Sean Parker is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He is openly a radical progressive leftist, and Freddie runs on the progressive platform. He presents himself as a progressive. He doesn't try to hide it. I think he kind of relies on the particulars of local politics to hide some of his more progressive ideas that may not translate directly to local politics. He focuses very intently on sidewalks and bike paths and this kind of thing, stuff that doesn't on the surface seem very threatening, but if you dig down into how one would go about transforming Nashville, which is the most car-centric city in the country, well, second most behind Memphis, which is, we have the two most car-centric cities in the country here in Tennessee. It's radical. Like, he put out an ad today that showed him talking. I don't even know what he was talking about, to be honest with you. I kind of tune out when guys are just politicizing. It's kind of hard to digest that. But he was talking in front of the Nashville Star, which is this rail that runs to downtown out to Lebanon, I think. And it's a railroad that's wholly subsidized by the federal government. And so he's run this campaign that's kind of, in a way, it's very online, because the concerns of transit advocates, especially in Nashville, seem to only find their voice online, on Twitter, etc. And Freddie's fairly active on Twitter, so you see a lot of his squad, rebut anyone that goes against him. So interesting that he, well, that's just who he is, and he seems blind to the fact that transit, to most people that live in Nashville, is just a non-existent issue. I wouldn't know to think about the bus, to even criticize it in the first place, if it weren't for politicians like Freddie O'Connell and Sean Parker to even bring it up to me. Most of the time, you see the buses around here. The joke is that the buses are never full, and so you don't really notice them. You just kind of gripe about them. It's one of my dad's, strong political opinions about city politics, is those buses are never full. What's the point of them? Everyone wonders that. No one ever thought to give voice to it until there was this aggressive, assertive movement to put more money towards them and try to evangelize the use of public transportation, which is, and if I was living in New York or San Francisco, I've lived in San Francisco, I haven't lived in New York, but I have lived in places where public transit is useful. I used to ride BART to work. I'd take BART to Caltrain to go down into the valley from San Francisco. It was a fairly common thing. It wasn't the most convenient thing, but it was nice. I liked doing it. It was fun to walk to the train station, and you could read a book on the train or whatever. I mean, it was nice, I'm not going to lie, but Nashville is just not that kind of city, and it's not set up to accommodate that kind of lifestyle. And a lot of people that are Freddie would be their avatar, have gained a foothold in Nashville politics and are, pushing to get these kind of priorities pushed forward. So another thing that's kind of related to Freddie, kind of not. In the Tennessean, they published an article last week. And again, this is all stuff that we cover in the newsletter. So if you like this commentary, or you like the focus on how we attack this stuff, you have to sign up for the newsletter. Is crime in Nashville. And there's a graph that you're looking at there. Total crime rate has generally decreased since the 90s. I'm not going to address the meta-historical reasons for crime fluctuation since the crack epidemic in the 90s. But what I will address is the last 5 or so years, because I think that's fairly relevant. If you look at this graph that we're looking at now, you can see violent crime has increased slightly, while property crime has gone down. And if we'll look at if we isolate on violent crime, then we see that violent crime since 2020 has gone up. And the reasons for that are myriad, but I think it's pretty simple. I think that following the summer of Floyd, as I call it, lax policing policies, In Tennessee, in Nashville, for example, starting in 2017 or 2018, I think it was. 2018, we pulled over about 120,000 drivers for traffic stops. Starting in the next year, they adopted this policy based on some national initiatives to reduce traffic stops because they would often result in bad press. Essentially, is my theory. They said that there's no correlation between traffic stops and reductions of violent crime or crime in general. And so 2018, 120,000 people were pulled over. The next year, when they initiated this program, only 30,000 people were pulled over, and that's held steady since then. The crime has a lot to do with COVID and that kind of stuff. But what goes unmentioned about the general decline in crime is that property crimes are often not reported because everyone in town, any big city that you live in, this is not unique to Nashville. Police departments are generally understaffed. If I, for example, like a package got stolen off my front porch within the past 6 months. Of course, I'm not going to call the police about that. It's just kind of one of those things that's this like petty level of property crime that's not even worth engaging a police officer about. But I was downtown in late April, and my car got broken into. And I had a jacket stolen and some other, I had the car title in there stupidly, and I'm trying to sell this car right now. And that's posed a difficulty because you got to order a copy of the title and everything. But they stole the title, they stole a jacket, they stole my favorite pocket knife. I think in an older time, I might have reported that to think that we could catch the guy that stole from my car. But now I don't even bother. There's no point. That police officers are overstaffed. You know that they don't have the bandwidth to be able to accommodate. The clearance rate for crimes and for homicides in Nashville is around 30%. And it's just kind of common knowledge. You don't even bother reporting this kind of stuff. And so to tie this back to Freddie. So Freddie, his transit ideology, his transit ideas, his pushing for a densified Nashville, his like advocacy for urbanizing Nashville and turning it more into a kind of, I guess what if you don't have an imagination, what you think of when you think of a city, which is like a bus and a coffee shop you could walk to, is typified by this tweet from one of his acolytes. And this is in response to a series of attack ads that were made against Freddie for being soft on crime. And this guy's attitude just sums up everything about what Freddie O'Connell represents. Wiltshire, Yarborough, and GOP cult member Alice Raleigh, who's second in polls, as we'll see in the next slide, think Nashville's a failed city in the mode of Chicago, New York, and New Orleans. They don't think it's a failed city. They think it's heading that direction if you don't head off developments like Freddie O'Connell, who are advocating for soft on crime policies while combining that with increasing density and expanding transit. You can't have either of those things without increasing crime unless you also endorse strengthening the police force. That's just a fact. I mean, denser cities have more crime. It's not hard to figure out why that is. There's more people. I'd gladly exchange some safety if we had their pizza, hot dogs, muffalettas, and their transit. So this guy is saying that he would sacrifice like public order just so we could get a better hot dog. This is kind of just a meme attitude, I guess. I don't know what the word is for it. It's one of these attitudes that you see parodied often, but when you encounter it, this guy's got a fit. Like you can figure out his name. He's not like anonymous or anything. He lives in Nashville and advocates for this. He'd probably support reducing the budget for the police if they would subsidize like a deep dish pizza place within walking distance from his house. And so like he could get mugged on the way. It doesn't matter. He doesn't care as long as he can get that deep dish pizza. Second to last thing. new polls came out about the mayor's race. Here they are. Firefly, Tennessee Firefly. It's a kind of pro-charter publication that's popped up. Freddie O'Connell, of course, is in the lead. He's been in the lead in every single poll that has been reported, and so that's worth noting. But most distinctly in this new poll is that Alice Raleigh has a clear lead in second. And polls are polls. Things. I think 58,000 people turned out to early vote this year, or 57,000, and another 50, 60,000 are going to turn out tomorrow to vote for mayor. So who knows who responds to these polls, but it is interesting. One thing that we do know for a fact, though, is that Freddie has been in the lead in every poll that's been reported. And this just reinforces that fact. What's also notable is that other polls have specified an undecided category, and this one just says other. So I'm not sure if that means other candidates or just undecided. But we still do have 14% of the people reporting undecided. And this poll was recorded, I think, middle of last week, if I remember correctly. I might have to be. Someone needs to fact check me on that. I'm not going on the record saying that, even though I'm saying it. So yeah, there's that. Last thing. August 1st was yesterday. The Biden administration has put together this kind of controversial policy about banning incandescent light bulbs. If you could see the room that I'm in right now, all you would see is incandescent bulbs. You would see nothing else. Just the glow, the warm glow of an incandescent bulb it'd warm your heart if you could be in this room with me right now. I'm looking at one right there in that lamp. Incandescent bulbs, it's the Thomas Edison bulb. It's a tungsten circuit that's warmed up by an electrical current and glows. They haven't changed much since they were created in 1879. And the Biden administration has decided that they're not energy efficient enough. And so they're banning them. I think the limit is like 45. I'm going to screw this up. I can't remember what it is. It's watts per lumen or lumen per watts. No, it's 45 lumens per watt. And if any bulb that falls under that is subject, it's now illegal for a retailer to sell it. So what I did was I think I have 300 Edison incandescent bulbs. They look a lot like the one in this meme that we're looking at with Harambe, Robin Williams, Queen Elizabeth, Muhammad Ali. Who else is in there? Michael Jackson. The Discovery submarine. Man, this is a good Steve Irwin. Tupac. I mean, just another lost American icon. The incandescent bulb, a product of America. Thomas Edison was American, and he invented the light bulb. He's like the prototype of the American entrepreneur. He wasn't necessarily, he wasn't a scientist that pioneered a new way to produce light. He was just the one that figured out how to produce it cheaply and efficiently. And that's kind of the history of that's arguably America's greatest contribution to the world is their inventiveness on this level. And Edison is an avatar of this, and they're erasing him. They're erasing Thomas Edison. I'm pretty pissed about it, actually. So that's it for the rundown. Next up, we got Jano Tantongco. Jano has written quite a few articles for us, and I would say that of all the people that write for us, Jano's always are. Well, Jano kind of typifies what I would like to publish more of, which are compelling, engaging in kind of taboo topics in a playful, intellectually deep way. And his latest article is on the accessorizing of mental health, basically. I kind of don't like the term mental health. It sounds like something that's been imposed upon me, but I'll say it because it's the most accurate way to describe it. But Jano's recent article called The Fashion of the Mind kind of gets into some social, cultural trends among Gen Z adopting mental illness as a as a kind of like status symbol. And we're going to talk more about that right now. You can see it on the page. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But yeah, Jano, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Davis. Hello to the viewers. Thank you for the kind words about the article. And I'm going to contact you offline about hooking up some bulbs because I'm in the market.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna start a black market for incandescent light bulbs. I'm not even joking.
That's hilarious.
We're there's a. I'm not the only one that's upset. That's deeply wounded by the incandescent bulb ban.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, so Jano, a theme for those that aren't familiar, you've written for us on like a cluster of topics that have been around. Kind of, I hate the term mental health. I don't know what else to say. What did we used to say? Mental illness. Um, but you've talked about detransitioners. You did a great piece about the role of testosterone in that the role that hormone replacement therapy could have potentially played in the Covenant massacre. So I'm wondering what draws you to this topic. This to me, it's one of the primary civilizational questions: is why does America uniquely produce people that are mentally ill and fat? And we're not talking about the fat part, but we're talking about the mentally ill part. So what draws you to this?
Well, I mean, personally, in terms of my writing and just, outside of that, I'm very interested in the mind, right? Consciously and unconsciously as well. And I think, unfortunately, we see the most incredible and also fascinating examples when it comes to mental illness, just how far a mental issue can really affect individuals and obviously the society around them. And again, as you and I were discussing a couple months back in kind of brainstorming for this piece, we were looking at RFK and how he was starting to talk about pharmaceuticals and in relation to shooters, right? Thinking about Audrey Hale and just the seemingly regular occurrence of school shootings now. Um, and people want to talk about guns, obviously, but really, I think anyone who can think clearly about that issue and the transgender issue and just this pervasive labeling, right? That's a term I use in the piece. Um, I think we can see that this kind of labeling is really speaking to something that's deeper, right? It's a crisis of the soul, right? I talk about the mind, but really I always love to take a step back. Like what is as you alluded to, what is the civilizational question here? What is the social question? So that's a bit of behind my thinking.
Yeah, it's important. I was at so Vivek Ramaswamy was in Nashville today. I think you saw that, and he came out to Nashville to advocate for the release of the Covenant of Audrey Hale's manifesto. Something that I've taken kind of a contrary position on here in town, for reasons that I'm not going to get into right now. But I think that the policy on that should be different than what he advocated for. But what he said repeatedly was, he used the word mental health repeatedly. Of course, he's not blaming the guns. He's talking about the mental health issues that perpetuated this act. And there was one guy in the crowd who there's a video of him on our Twitter who got up and started talking about like getting mad at him for saying that it was a mental health issue. He was, saying it was a demonic. It's an issue of demonic possession, and you know, I think you could predict what else he would say from there. But so like the mental health label kind of takes these things that maybe we in other ages we might understand as eccentricities and gives them form. It gives them a brand basically. So
Right. And I actually touch on exactly that concept
yeah,
toward the end of the piece. That these are things that were once quote unquote diagnosed as moral failings or as just instability in society. And now we've kind of taken that former role and we've put it on this secular managerial class who, for a variety of reasons, wants to kind of push this, again, labeling onto people. It commodifies it. It makes it plug and play. It makes it so that you don't have to address any kind of internal sickness or just otherwise just disease, right? Disease that is afflicting you. Instead, the solution that is peddled to people is, this is your condition. This is the outlined therapy, and in many cases, it includes medication. Right? That's kind of the final destination when people are put on this road. And just going back a little bit, another inspiration was the transgender issue. Right? Just seeing how far um, people will go to fulfill this identity. Right? The vacuum, the hole, the spiritual hole is so vast that these are the lengths that people will go to. And again, to me, it's both stunning but fascinating, right?
There's a great passage in the article. And I'm going to read it right now. This brings us back to the fashion of the mind. There is a natural limit to what we can signal with clothes, accessories, and personality affectations alone. But in our neuroticism, a switch flipped in the 21st century. Fashion of the garment was not enough. We have arrived at a place where everyday people are compelled to adorn themselves with neopronouns, emojis of allegiance to Black Lives Matter, Ukraine, and then something of an inverted magnum opus, the unquestionable adoption of mental illness labels and their complementary psychiatric medications and even surgery to add a veneer of authenticity to the quaking mass that is the postmodern ego. I mean, I love that. I feel like that sums up uh, that's a great nugget of kind of your point there. So what I'm wondering is why are these accoutrements, be they pharmaceutical drugs, surgeries, or descriptions of mental illness, so valuable to the ego? What are the incentives that push people towards these things?
Well, I mean, I think in times past, these kinds of things, in the context of America, let's say, are kind of bullied out very early on, right? Any weird affectation, any deviation from social norms, you get bullied for, right? Sometimes unjustly, and sometimes maybe there's a place for that, right? Um, and so I think it's we want to take on an identity when there's nothing there, right? It's a vacuum. When you don't have your personality built up, um, really your ego, right? People like to say in more new agey spirituality, we want to get rid of the ego, we want to attain bliss, right? This is kind of the spiritual connection. But really, when you don't develop your ego, and again, I'm not a mental health professional, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist,
Yeah,
but
keep that in
but
mind, people.
right, yes.
It's not
but
never.
I but I think when you don't develop your ego, naturally what's going to happen? You're going to look to fill that space where you lack an internal foundation. Or secular society, there's no religion, there's no spirituality to rely on unless you still practice, which, as we know, is declining, right? So there's that emptiness on the one hand, which is why people want to take on these identities, I think. And that would only be possible if you have a structure around it that supports and uplifts this. And I
Mhm.
think we see that in this push to normalize and to accept these kinds of labels in people.
So after the Covenant massacre, so I that's where I grew up going to church. I have family that's very involved in the church,
Mm.
My dad was actually the first one in the church after the police cleared the scene, and I knew two of the people that were killed. So it hit. It was very close to home. And one
Mhm.
thing that I noticed in the aftermath of that, and it kind of gets at what you're saying about the kind of secularization of culture, is that it does feel like people that don't have religion or God are increasingly siloed off into these media echo chambers. And you get into this in your article. A lot of it is they're being fed information, whether it's from proper sanctioned news media like NPR or CNN or whatever. I don't know, the Jacobin, um, or it comes to them through this media lens, and without a church or a community to go to that can offer answers to this, it feels like it's pretty easy to get alienated from yourself. And that was kind of my diagnosis following the COVID or the covenant uh, into tragedy, was that the language of the media and the language of local leaders that were not religious leaders failed completely in addressing these things. So, what I'm curious about in your piece, you talk some about how this stuff is spread over social media. So I'm wondering, I mean, how big of a role this kind of trend has it been accelerated with social media, and how important do you think that is to this trend? Do you think is it just a mechanism to express this kind of like secular culture, or is it solely to blame for it? You know what I mean?
Right. It's probably a bit of both. It's probably message is the medium, I would say partly. Um, I don't think you would have what's going on without social media, right? You look at historically maybe something like the Salem witch trials or the McCarthy era, which may or may not have been justified looking back on it now. You look at medieval times where you have a dancing frenzy, a hysteria that affects a group of people. Hysteria, this kind of mass uh, w- sociogenic kind of illness is possible. It's a possible condition, I think, that can affect people, right? And so, what other perfect vehicle than 24/7 hyper connected web that anyone can introduce a concept, it could spread virally, right? It the language is already there in terms of how an idea can become a pathogen, right? Uh, for instance, if you take the transgender issue and you look at the psychologists and the psychiatrists who are talking about this, who are discussing this over and over again, they will bring up the term social contagion,
Hmm.
right? As in, it's there's a part of it that's not. Maybe a lot of them won't say it, but it kind of implies there's something about it that's not genuine. Otherwise, it wouldn't be social, right? It would be something innate, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting though, beyond the kind of mimetic spread of it, that it's incentivized. I mean, kids are celebrated for these things. I'm looking through your article right now. Like, one thing that sticks out is the Tumblr. Their um, everything okay. If you were someone you know was struggling, you were not alone. If you use words like depression, crying, and scars, and I'm sure like you don't get deeply into Tumblr, but Tumblr played a very prominent role, as reported by some other writers, in kind of spreading a lot of this stuff. It was kind of the hub for it.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Is it the computers or is it the lack of God? I guess that's really what I want to know. Is like, would this stuff happen if we didn't have computers? If we had a completely secular culture that had shucked off God, like Christianity in particular, just totally decided that Christianity was backwards and the wrong direction for uh, for a person to, or the wrong way for one to understand the world. Um, would this happen? I don't know. I That's kind of like, it's like a chicken or egg problem in a lot of ways because
I mean, I would say again, when we think historically, you do have examples where you have a religious culture, and they get into a kind of mania, they get into a kind of frenzy. I think about Anglican church, and how you might have the sale of indulgences, and just a kind of uh, bastardization of these principles that maybe they have a good intention, but they're going to kind of spin off and maybe just make pathogens out of things that maybe aren't, right.
yeah. There's this McLuhan quote about the internet being inherently satanic. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
I thought it was interesting. It's not in your article, but well, two things. So you bring up two specific. Well, we have videos for two specific disorders, and one of them is this, like, what's the personality transformation one?
The dissociative identity disorder, which is just the new name for multiple personality disorder.
Right. So elaborate on that for us.
So there's the mainstream theory behind dissociative identity disorder is that there's a trauma in the childhood, and it's so great, it's so unbearable, that it causes the mind to have a schism, to have some kind of break that makes it dissociate, right? As in to leave this reality, and maybe in that case construct an alternate persona some kind of coping mechanism to compartmentalize the trauma that's happening, or that has been happening. Um, I think it's a genuine condition, but and again, I'm not a psychologist, but when you look at how it manifests on TikTok, for instance, it doesn't seem genuine. It seems like people faking this mental illness for clicks, for likes, for shares. But I'll let you be the judge by watching this.
Yeah, let's watch. This is 3 minutes long. I don't know if I can make it the whole way, but let's watch. I don't hear sound. Is there? Huh. Maybe it's like dude. TikTok is very sophisticated. If you navigate away from the window, the video stopped. I noticed that when I was taking notes uh, before this. If I
Oh, I
navigate
see.
like to it stops the video. So um, well, this so I mean, we kind of narrate this. This is a guy like 1056. He's this person basically. I'm explaining it very crudely. Maybe you would like what's going on here. He's showing a video.
I mean, he's showing his day, and he's showing how a different alter. That's what they call the dissociated personality, right? How a different alter will pop up if you're chopping vegetables, or if you're going out for a walk, or if you're about to take a nap. How different personalities manifest as a result of your day-to-day activities. But again, my skepticism comes in when it's like, does it coincide so perfectly with your social media account? Is it always going to pop up at will? I think these are genuine conditions, but the
There,
way we see it on TikTok is that really what's going on?
there is certainly an incentive that encourages them to fake it. If they like think about it. If you're if you're a person, a rat, just looking for food, like, and you figure out a way to get food. In this case, it's dopamine, and you are experimenting on TikTok, and you kind of settle on this thing where you've got this whatever, I don't know, you've got this shtick, and it happens to be a mental illness, I can see how that would incentivize you to act more ill. Like I think any of us can kind of inhabit that mindset. You kind of as you get attention, especially online, there is an incentive to act a certain way to kind of play into it. And I think anyone that's had any sort of attention online can attest to that. That you understand that. So you've got a massive amount of dopamine coming your way from notifications, I guess is the way that I would describe it. Attention, people showering praise on you. It's very easy to misinterpret that as positive feedback that has some bearing on on the real world, but it doesn't. So I could see how someone isolated could get lost and kind of play with their identities in that way. Um, so there's another one which is the Tourette's one, and so it's funny because when you wrote this article, I had keyed in on the Tourette's thing, and I'd actually called someone out for it and got in trouble. Like got I don't know. I was like, "There's no way that's real." You're saying beans over and over again. Beans. I think I say the word beans probably once a month. Um, but anyway, I don't know if they say beans in this video, but it's a Tourette's video. This one probably has sound because it's not on TikTok.
My sister and her friends have been faking Tourette's for the last 20 minutes watching Miraculous. Bro, you know what me and my friends did when we were this age? We used to play sport heads football on the school during IT period. All right, school. Come on, we're literally watching how these people even came to be. They watch something on TikTok and they try to emulate it, even though they don't have the problem at all.
Yeah.
You're a disappointment to your family and society at large. Please stop. Anyways, if you want to be sane, subscribe.
I agree with that guy. I grew, doing prank calls growing up. I don't know, that seems like a kind of form of pranking if you're just connected at the hip to the internet.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of what I mentioned. We all had phases. We all had fads that we bought into, right? For me, I'm 34, millennial, late millennial, elder millennial, however they like to call it now.
Geriatric millennial, I think.
Yeah, basically.
I think they call it geriatrics. You're a geriatric, man. Congrats.
Yeah. And emo culture was a big deal, right? Dashboard Confessional,
Yes.
Under Oath, all these bands, right? That kind of typified this personality that you would take on, depressed, emotive and insightful about all of the romantic elements of the world that are missed by mainstream culture, right? And yet, enough to spawn a corporate entity like Hot Topic. That ordinarily, I think we should let go. That's meant to be let go. But when you have an entire society, an engine that's supporting that, uplifting that, affirming that, it doesn't go away. That adolescence continues, I think, into 20s, 30s, what have you. And you see what we have today, which is it takes this impulse and it makes it into a legitimate mode of being, which again, in the before times, I don't think would have been possible.
So let's talk about another thing that you bring up in the article, which is the pharmaceutical side of this. Like the idea of illnesses starting on me faking ADHD emerging as this kind of, well, first of all, I'll say about ADD, ADHD, I feel like that is something that people almost want to be labeled as. Even in my age group, people kind of there's like a little bit of pride in being ADHD and making it through life. People are not going to like shy away from being labeled ADHD, and I would argue in a lot of ways that ADHD is just like the natural state of a man. But let's talk about the pharmaceutical side of this. I'm looking at this like this is not benign enough for it to just be this very basic kind of fad thing. Sometimes it turns into a lifelong addiction to pharmaceutical drugs. It's like a gateway to that. It's not like some other kind of innocent sidebar you go on as a teenager, right? It can manifest, it can get attached to a drug or something like that.
Right, and that was really the intention behind the piece, and hopefully behind thinking in this kind of way about what's happening. It would be funny if it were just limited to kids just faking Tourette's while watching TV, but that's not the case. And you bring up ADHD. One of the first treatments for that is taking Ritalin, is taking essentially low grade amphetamine to compensate for a lack of focus. And you say it's probably inherent to the male condition. It certainly could be that. It just might be the ordinary fluctuation of people's personality that you put into this box and say, because you can't stand still, you're medicated, right? It's just too convenient that this segues into this $1 trillion industry, right? And so I think that that's like the first starting point. You need to be skeptical about this.
Of course.
Whereas the first instinct now in the mainstream is to affirm, validate, medicate. That's what's happening.
From 97 to 2016, ADHD diagnosis shot up from 6% to 10% in kids aged 4 to 17. And I mean, like, it's hard for me to separate that from the financial incentives that would encourage a doctor to prescribe Ritalin or some such thing to a kid.
Right, right. And a little bit more on the stats is that there's at least two studies that I found that observed the ages of the kids who were actually diagnosed with ADHD, and they found that the younger children, let's say in second grade, third grade, whatever it is, were more likely, almost twice as likely, to be diagnosed with ADHD based on teacher observations. Right. In other words, the teachers are making these referrals and they're looking at the youngest kids acting out in the classroom and saying that they have ADHD. And in these studies, they try to control for things like, what if they're both young and have ADHD?
What if they want to go fishing? Do they control for that?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's yeah, it's the pharmaceutical aspect. I think we tend to focus on big pharma, big bad, big pharma. They have billions of dollars in advertising that they're imposing onto the people. They have captured the medical industry. Yeah, I think that's a huge element.
You list some
But
pretty
where's the demand?
shocking numbers, like Zoloft, $523 million spent on Zoloft a year. Adderall, $2.35 billion spent purchasing Adderall a year. Prozac, $654 million. Xanax, $197 million, mostly in the South, probably, if I had to guess. $744 million for Lamictal. I mean, like, I don't understand how you could assess this stuff without scrutinizing the financial incentives that encourage the diagnosis of these mental illnesses. And I mean, if you're thinking about it from a purely business perspective, I'm thinking I want to get a kid on Ritalin as soon as possible so that he's a lifelong customer. That's a revenue stream for me. And it's a lot of the same incentives that are that drive some of these transition surgeries as well.
Oh yeah, and that ties into something that I mentioned a little bit later in the piece as well. The advent of these online mental health
Yes,
services. One of them is this startup that was called Cerebral, and they basically did tele mental health. Right, you connect with a provider and tell them about your issues, have kind of a therapy session, and then they're qualified to prescribe something to you, right? And they started in 2020, but just the year after, they were finding that it was much more profitable for them to do this for ADHD versus depression and anxiety. they found a greater conversion rate, and that's where they set their sights on next. They 10x'd their sales, and their valuation was 4.8 billion. But that was before they came under a federal investigation. So yeah, at the very least, you need to come into this with a healthy skepticism, I would say. And again, I wanna kind of disclaim a little bit. I'm not trying to say that mental illness is not real. Maybe the term mental health is not the best. I don't really know what else we would
I don't
we
either.
would call it. Um, Mental illness is real, right? And there was a time when it was stigmatized, when you couldn't talk about it, right? Vietnam vets returning home from the war, we don't want to hear about your problems. That's the treatment that they received, right? When you kill 15-year-old Vietnamese guerrilla fighter who's just defending his land, maybe that leaves an imprint on your mind for a while. And so I don't want to invalidate things like that, and it doesn't even need to be to that extreme, right? But again, it's a symptom of the times that we're in. There's overcorrection happening.
I'm going to read your closing couple of paragraphs are very kind of sum up the point you just made there. And arguably, the greater problem is that this overprescription of mental illness and pharmaceutical drugs chokes the impulse towards progress in the individual. Which, yes, it's a palliative instead of something that encourages them to, improve themselves and master their these things. Instead of the possibility of having issues with punctuality, we have to have time blindness. Instead of attempting to hone a naturally energetic and curious mind, we must have ADHD, and amphetamines are the answer. Instead of accepting one's biological sex and potential deviation from traditional gender roles, we are unequivocally born in the wrong body, and the only cure is going under the knife. It also facilitates the micronizing of the civic and cultural soul. We're not just more polarized than ever, as any contemporary critic can point out. The frenetic blooming of a subculture within subcultures and therefore identity labels traps the individual in a labyrinth of abstraction. And that's such a good point, because if we're both fortunate enough to not have grown up being just immiserated in these very minor decisions. Like when I grew up, it's like you were gay or straight. You liked chicks or you didn't. I mean, that's just how it was. There was no like sapiosexual, asexual. You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine like growing up having to navigate that would be a nightmare, especially if it's being, you know, taught in schools or whatever. It's like it feels like a top-down effort to impose that, because these concepts when I was young didn't exist. They didn't exist when you were young either in school, and now they're all over the place. It's a great point. That traps the individual in a labyrinth of abstraction. And like I'll say this about um, the disposition of the South as opposed to the North has always been a distrust of abstraction, and I think that's why
Hmm.
you've seen Southern states mount such a strong resistance to a lot of this stuff.
Right.
Because just kind of by the nature of the people that settled down here, there is this massive distrust for abstraction, and I also distrust abstraction. I'm going to continue reading here, and you can interrupt whenever you want if you want something to add. But I think that um, your article says a lot of this. In a race to the bottom, our incessant overlabeling divides us further and further from our peers. In the pursuit of social currency and shortcuts to mature self-development, we adopt corporate-sponsored labels to prop up egos that have been built up by a shoddy scaffolding of trite slogans, celebrity worship, and otherwise undifferentiated and chaotic social white noise. Um, yeah, again, alienating us from our peers. I mean, can you imagine like meeting like a kid as a 12-year-old and being like, "Oh, are you having to like have that conversation?" like what are your pronouns, what what's your who are you into sexually. I feel like that probably happens. I mean, anyway, I'm just ranting like a boomer, but the ultimate irony of all this is that fashion of mind itself seems to be a legitimate mental illness, and that's important. But it's not one we'll find in the DSM. It's born of a pathogen in the collective mind. Throughout time, our theologians and philosophers have been its diagnosticians. In our historically recent secularization of society, the task of diagnosis has fallen into the hands of the academic and bureaucratic class, whose self-selected neuroses and inclinations for passive-aggressive control shine through. I mean, yeah, man.
Yeah. I in reflecting on all this, this is something I didn't include, but I thought about in the piece as I was trying to close it up. This alienation is something that Marx and students of Marx think about, actually, except their conception of social alienization is because of capital, right?
Yes,
Capital alienates, the working class from each other.
right.
And I think maybe that's half right. Um, the way that we're seeing it now, I think people are choosing to alienate themselves from one another, because there is, again, this kind of vacuum. There is this lack, spiritually, mentally, however you want to conceptualize it. Um, and it's just so attractive to fall into this well, basically, right? You fall into the black screen and you just scroll endlessly, and you find your people. You find exactly who you want to connect to. And again, yeah, we probably do sound like boomers, and yet I think this is a unique phenomena,
Well, I think
right?
we're also at the age where we've experienced kind of both sides of the coin. We experienced,
Yes.
you know, I would say that I became more online and more acquainted with digital when I lived in Los Angeles, which is a very online city.
Oh yeah.
It's a hellhole to get around in. You can't go anywhere because the city's just jammed full of traffic all the time. Um, for whatever reason, that city invites this kind of insular, independent attitude in a way that I'd never experienced before. I mean, growing up in Nashville, I kind of grew up in a suburby type area, but eh, there was always people around. LA is like you move out there, you're like a mercenary soldier, like alone. You don't have any allies. You have to build a band of brothers. It's
Hmm.
um, and so I understand, and a lot of people that you meet out there kind of fall into this like pit of isolation, and I guess it's seductive enough to some people to kind of anchor them there and keep them stuck there.
And it makes them easily manipulable.
Very, yes,
Yep.
yes,
Yep.
very much. I mean, there's so much to say about this, and you've done like not even this article, but all the other articles that you've written. The one on hormone replacement therapy that we talked about briefly earlier. The one about artificial intelligence and its ramifications on the mind. The detransitioners article that you wrote, porn, etc. You've addressed a lot of these issues that I think are very underrated, and you don't see discussed in enough. I mean, they're kind of hard to talk about. It's like, what do you kind of sound like a dickhead going to tell someone that they're faking their mental illness, and I would never say that to someone that I don't know well enough to have like a founded opinion on it.
Right. Exactly.
But
Yeah.
it's worth them considering. Like, okay, well, let's before you take a doctor's word for it or someone's that's incentivized to prescribe you a drug, maybe you should, you know, think about whether that's the correct way to label your life. So
Right. And the problem with this is that you're not going to hear the criticism of these frameworks from the professionals, right? There's
No,
there's there's very few mental health, maybe we don't like the term, but whatever. There's few mental health professionals who are going to really stand up and say, "Hey, at least part of what we're doing is not either not genuine or it's done improperly." It's not going to come from within the profession for the most part. So yes, maybe we're not qualified to discuss, but at least we can preface that and try to
well,
dig a little deeper.
I'm kind of like a fan of when the Reformation happened. It kind of just defeated the actual authority of the expert, and we just kind of been dealing with that since then. And so I think I can't. I'm not going to go too deep into my theory there, but I do think that people know better for themselves than they're led on to believe. And I think a lot of this is
Yes.
outsourcing a lot of this stuff to authorities that they don't try to suss out whether they have their best interest in mind.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and we've all probably been in those situations where you trust someone who maybe not necessarily a malicious person, but whatever their incentives are to engage with you, push them to push you in a certain direction. I think I mean, that's always, so.
Yeah.
Well, Jano, thank you very much for joining me. I can't wait to see what you write next. Um, for people that have not read Jano's article, we put it's on our website. I posted about it on Twitter. It's a very good read, and I would suggest reading all of Jano's stuff. It's evergreen content, as they say in this industry. It's not going to age. He has a great piece on artificial intelligence. He's got a great piece on the perspectives of detransitioners. That I mean, it was recently in the news. There was a congressional hearing. I don't know if you saw video of that. I'm trying to think.
I think I might have missed that.
Um, Yeah, but anyway, Jano, you've done some great work for us, and I look forward to seeing, next time you publish something. Of course, we're going to have you on to talk about it. So,
Absolutely. I'm happy to come on. And it was a pleasure. Thanks so much, Davis.
yeah, Jano's on. We'll put all his like social info around too. He's on Twitter.
Yeah,
Uh,
I could try to spell it for you guys, but just look at the show notes.
I got you spelling it Tantongco.
There you go. That's it.
Got it.
Awesome.
All right,
Thank
Jano.
you.
Thanks a lot, brother.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, well, that's our show for tonight. Again, if you guys do not subscribe to our daily newsletter, or you don't, I guess the thing to say here is like hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you're watching it there. Hit that follow button on Twitter. But the main thing is I want you to read our daily newsletter. So if you haven't subscribed to that, yeah, there it is. There's that URL. Go there, sign up for the newsletter. We send out stuff every single morning. I wake up every morning in a cold sweat and have to imagine what I'm going to write to entertain people, and it's exhausting. But no, I love it. No joke. So anyway, thank you all. We'll see you next week.